Hi, students. Today we're going to be doing a recorded lesson. So I'm going to guide you through the reading just like I would in class. The only difference is you really can't answer yourself. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you remember last time in our notes, we met Mary Warren, Mercy Lewis, and John Proctor. And so right now, we're going to get a little bit more description about John Proctor, and we want to see what his role is in this story. So let's continue.
It is another trait we inherited from them, and it has helped to discipline us as well as to breed hypocrisy among us. Proctor, respected and even feared in Salem, has come to regard himself as a kind of fraud. But no hint of this has yet appeared on the surface, and as he enters from the crowded parlor below, it is a man in his prime we see, with a quiet confidence and an unexpressed hidden force. Mary Warren, his servant, can barely speak for embarrassment.
All right, so we see that John Proctor is described as being respected and even feared. And so we know that he's a very respectable person. You can add that to your note from last time. Last time we wrote down that he was a farmer in his 30s and he considered himself a sinner. Now, to that same part of your notes, you're going to add that he's very respected. Okay, let's continue.
And fear.
Oh, I'm just going home, Mr. Proctor.
Are you foolish, Mary Warren? Be you deaf? I forbid you leave the house, did I not? Why shall I pay you? I am looking for you more often than my cows.
I only come to see the great doings in the world.
I'll show you a great doing on your arse one of these days. Now get you home. My wife is waiting with your work.
I'd best be off. I have my Ruth to watch. Good morning, Mr. Proctor.
Mercy sidles out. Since Proctor's entrance, Abigail has stood as though on tiptoe, absorbing his presence wide-eyed. He glances at her, then goes to Betty on the bed.
Gah. I'd almost forgot how strong you are, John Proctor.
Proctor looking at Abigail now, the faintest suggestion of a knowing smile on his face.
What's this mischief here?
Oh, she's only gone silly somehow.
The road past my house is a pilgrimage to Salem all morning. The town's mumbling witchcraft.
Oh, posh.
Winningly, she comes a little closer, with a confidential, wicked air.
We were dancing in the woods last night, and my uncle leaped in on us. She took fright is all.
Ah, you're wicked yet, aren't you? You'll be clapped in the stocks before you're 20.
He takes a step to go, and she springs into his path.
Give me a word, John. A soft word.
Her concentrated desire destroys his smile.
No, Abby, that's done with.
You come 5 mile to see a silly girl fly? I know you better.
I come to see what mischief your uncle's brewing now. Put it out of mind, Abby.
Grasping his hand before he can release her.
John, I am waiting for you every night.
Abby, I never give you hope to wait for me.
I have something better than hope, I think.
Abby, you'll put it out of mind. I'll not be coming for you more.
You're surely sporting with me.
You know me better.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we definitely should have a question right now. So you have this dialogue between Abigail and John Proctor, and you should be able to tell there's something going on between them. So we're going to make sure that we put a question on the left side of our Cornell notes. And our question should be, what is the relationship between Abigail and John? So let's put that on the left side of our notes. What is the relationship between John and Abigail? So there are some things that you should have noticed. For example, right here after line 500, she says, "Oh, I almost forgot how strong you are, John Proctor." So I'm just going to highlight that because that catches my attention. It almost sounds like flirtatious. And then she explains what happened to Betty, saying that they were dancing in the woods and they were startled by her uncle. And then we have some of these descriptions. He's smiling at her. Um, and then it says a trill of expectant laughter escapes her, and she dares comes closer, feverishly looking into his eyes. So she's looking into his eyes, and then she tells him, "Give me a word, John, a soft word." That should definitely catch our attention because there seems to be something between Abigail and John Proctor. And so these two quotes that I've highlighted kind of give me an idea about what is going on between them. And then he says, because she said, "Give me a soft word." And he says, "No, no, Abby, that's done with." And so we know something has happened between them, but we don't know what has happened. So we have that note that we just took, the question, and we put it on the left side of our notes. Let's continue and see what else happens.
I know how you clutched my back behind your house and sweated like a stallion whenever I come near. Or did I dream that? It's she put me out. You cannot pretend it were you. I saw your face when she put me out, and you loved me then, and you do now.
Abby, that's a wild thing to say.
A wild thing may say wild things, but not so wild, I think. I have seen you since she put me out. I have seen you nights.
I have hardly stepped off my farm this 7 month.
I have a sense for heat, John. And yours has drawn me to my window, and I have seen you looking up, burning in your loneliness. Do you tell me you've never looked up at my window?
I may have looked up.
And you must. You are no wintry man. I know you, John. I know you. I cannot sleep for dreamin'. I cannot dream, but I wake and walk about the house as though I'd find you comin' through some door.
She clutches him desperately, gently pressing her from him with great sympathy, but firmly.
Child.
How do you call me child?
Abby, I may think of you softly from time to time, but I will cut off my hand before I'll ever reach for you again. Wipe it out of mind. We never touched, Abby.
Aye, but we did.
Aye, but we did not.
Oh, I marvel how such a strong man may let such a sickly wife
You'll
be...
speak nothing of a...
All right, so here we get more information about this relationship. And Abigail tells us, "I know how you clutched me back behind your house and sweated like a stallion whenever I come near. Or did I dream that? It's she who put me out. You cannot pretend it were you. I saw your face when she put me out, and you loved me then, and you do now." In this section right here, we definitely get some clues. Um, there's clues that their relationship may have been physical, but we also find out more about Goody Proctor. And so Abigail is accusing Goody Proctor of kicking her out and her being the one that fired Abigail. And then Abigail makes a claim and she says, "You loved me then and you do now." And so we definitely want to write this on the right side of our notes. We want to put in here at line 554, Abigail says that John Proctor loves her. So put that on the right side of your notes. Abigail says that John Proctor loves her. That is very important. And then as we go on, we know that there seems to be a denial going on here. At first, John Proctor, because Abigail is coming closer, she's grabbing onto him, and he is pushing her away, and he says, "Child." And she says, "How do you call me child?" And he says, I may think of you softly from time to time, but I will cut off my hand before I'll ever reach for you again. Wipe it out of mind. We never touched Abby. And she says, I, but we did. I means yes. And he says, I, but we did not. So you need to think here to yourself, did something happen? Um, or did something not happen? So who is right now? Is it Abigail or is it John Proctor? And that's for you to decide as the reader, who you think is telling the truth here. All right, let's continue.
She is blackening my name in the village. She is telling lies about me. She is a cold, sniveling woman, and you bend to her, let her turn you
Do
like...
you look for whipping?
I look for John Proctor, that took me from my sleep and put knowledge in my heart. I never knew what pretense Salem was. I never knew the lying lessons I was taught by all these Christian women and their covenanted men. And now you bid me tear the light out of my eyes? I will not. I cannot. You loved me, John Proctor. And whatever sin it is, you love me yet.
He turns abruptly to go out. She rushes to him.
John, pity me. Pity me.
All right, so something else that we can put in our notes is this right here. Abigail tells John, you loved me, John Proctor, and whatever sin it is, you love me yet. So she's accusing him. She's saying, you do still love me. And so we want to put that in our notes because she is very passionate here. And we need to think. And a question we can put on our left side of our notes is, does John Proctor still love Abigail? And you need to think about this. Is this all in Abigail's head because she likes John Proctor? Or does he love her and all of these things really happened? All right, and now we have the people in the background singing. And let's see what else happens.
Me.
The words going up to Jesus are heard in the psalm, and Betty claps her ears suddenly and whines loudly.
Betty?
She hurries to Betty, who is now sitting up and screaming. Proctor goes to Betty as Abigail is trying to pull her hands down, calling,
Betty!
What's she doing? Girl, what ails you? Stop that wailing!
The singing has stopped in the midst of this, and now Paris rushes in.
What happened? What are you doing to her? Betty!
He rushes to the bed, crying.
Betty! Betty!
Mrs. Putnam enters, feverish with curiosity, and with her Thomas Putnam and Mercy Lewis. Paris at the bed keeps lightly slapping Betty's face, while she moans and tries to get up.
She heard you singing, and suddenly she's up and screaming.
The psalm. The psalm. She cannot bear to hear the Lord's name.
No, God forbid. Mercy, run to the doctor. Tell him what's happened here.
Mercy Lewis rushes out.
Mark it for a sign. Mark it.
Rebecca Nurse, 72, enters. She is white-haired, leaning upon her walking stick.
All right, so we're going to pause for a minute. So we know that Abigail, John Proctor were in the room by themselves, and Betty was in there with them, but she was inert. And then once she starts hearing the song, Betty wakes up. So we can take a note of that on the right side of our notes, that Betty wakes up when she hears the song. And now we have a new character as well that we're going to write down. And our new character is Rebecca Nurse. And they tell us she is 72 and she has white hair and she's leaning on her walking stick. So she is quite old, especially in this time. Some of you researched this. People didn't live as long as they do now. And so the fact that she's 72 does make her pretty old in this time. All right, let's continue. So just make sure that you wrote down Rebecca Nurse on the left side of your notes.
That is a notorious sign of witchcraft afoot. Goody nurse, a prodigious sign.
My mother told me that. When they cannot bear to hear the name of
Rebecca, go to her. We're lost. She suddenly cannot bear to hear the Lord.
Giles Corey, 83, enters. He is knotted with muscle, canny, inquisitive, and still powerful.
There is hard sickness here, Giles Corey, so please to keep the quiet.
I've not said a word. No one here can testify I've said a word. Is she going to fly again? I hear she flies.
Man, be quiet now.
All right, so you have a new character as well to add to Rebecca Nurse, and you have this character of Giles Corey. He's even older, he's 83, and they say he's knotted with muscle, which means he's still strong. Canny means his mind is still working really good, and inquisitive and powerful. So he's curious. That's what inquisitive means. He tries to figure things out. So you're going to make sure you take your note for Giles Corey on the left side of your notes. So make sure you put Giles Corey, 83, and I am going to put that he's strong. And I'm going to put witty because that means, his mind is still working. And he tells us he's there because he wanted to see Betty fly. And he's like, is she going to fly? I hear she flies. So let's just finish this page out.
Quiet now. Everything is quiet. Rebecca walks across the room to the bed. Gentleness exudes from her. Betty is quietly whimpering, eyes shut. Rebecca simply stands over the child, who gradually quiets.
All right, and one of the things they tell us that they add to Rebecca is gentleness exudes her. And this is important because what this means, exudes, means that it's coming out of her. As soon as she walks into a room, people can feel that she is gentle and kind. And so this is something we can add to the Rebecca note we have in our notes. She is gentle. All right, and so we're going to get some information here about Rebecca. And even though this is about Rebecca, some of these notes we're going to put on the right side of our notes.
And while they are so absorbed, we may put a word in for Rebecca. Rebecca was the wife of Francis Nurse, who from all accounts was one of those men for whom both sides of the argument had to have respect. He was called upon to arbitrate disputes as though he were an unofficial judge, and Rebecca also enjoyed the high opinion most people had for him. By the time of the delusion they had 300 acres, and their children were settled in separate homesteads within the same estate. However, Francis had originally rented the land, and one theory has it that as he gradually paid for it and raised his social status, there were those who resented his rise. Another suggestion to explain the systematic campaign against Rebecca, and inferentially against Francis, is the land war he fought with his neighbors, one of whom was a Putnam. This squabble grew to the proportions of a battle in the woods between partisans of both sides, and it is said to have lasted for 2 days. As for Rebecca herself, the general opinion of her character was so high that to explain how anyone dared cry her out for a witch, and more, how adults could bring themselves to lay hands on her, we must look to the fields and boundaries of that time.
All right, so these two paragraphs give us some information about Rebecca. And what we find out that we need to take note of is that Rebecca is the wife of Francis Nurse. Let's see if I can highlight that. So this is something you can put on the right side of your notes. Excuse me. Even though it deals with Rebecca, I've run out of room to add that on the left. So I'm going to add it on the right side of my notes. And I'm also going to include the page numbers when I can. So in case I have to go back and find this information, I can. So Rebecca is the wife of Francis Nurse. And they tell us that he was very respected and that Rebecca enjoyed the high opinion most people had for him. And what that means is people have a high opinion of him. They think he's very respectable, and she enjoys that. Then they say that they had 300 acres of land, and their children all settled on that land. Remember, in this time, that land is what makes your wealth. So they had a lot of land. Some of you guys are familiar with acres and land. 300 acres is a lot. And so they tell us that originally Francis had rented that land, but then he gradually pays for it. And as he acquires more and more land, he gets richer and richer. And they tell us there are some people who resented this. They did not like him because he was moving up. Another thing they tell us is he had a land war with his neighbors, and they were fighting over land. And one of these people he was fighting with was Putnam. And this should catch your attention. So I'm going to take a note of this on the right side of my notes. Francis Nurse had a land war with the Putnams. So this is important. So my note says Francis Nurse had a land war with the Putnams. And they even tell us this grew into a battle. So they actually had like a war over their land that lasted for 2 days. Um, and they give us some foreshadowing as well. They say that Rebecca's character was so high that to explain how anyone dared cry her out for a witch and more, how adults could bring themselves to lay hand on her, we must look to the fields and boundaries of the time. So we know that sometime in the future, they're going to accuse Rebecca Nurse of witchcraft. This is crazy because she is so gentle and so respected in the community.
As we have seen, Thomas Putnam's man for the Salem ministry was Bailey. The Nurse clan had been in the faction that prevented Bailey's taking office. In addition, certain families allied to the Nurses by blood or friendship, and whose farms were contiguous with the Nurse farm or close to it, combined to break away from the Salem town authority and set up Topsfield, a new and independent entity whose existence was resented by old Salemites. That the guiding hand behind the outcry was Putnam's is indicated by the fact that as soon as it began, this Topsfield Nurse faction absented themselves from church in protest and disbelief. It was Edward and Jonathan Putnam who signed the first complaint against Rebecca, and Thomas Putnam's little daughter was the one who fell into a fit at the hearing and pointed to Rebecca as her attacker. To top it all, Mrs. Putnam, who is now staring at the bewitched child on the bed, soon accused Rebecca's spirit of tempting her to iniquity, a charge that had more truth in it than Mrs. Putnam could know.
All right, so what this part tells us is that we know that there is a lot of division in their community. And then it tells us that the guiding hand behind the outcry was Putnam, is indicated by the fact that as soon as it began, this Topsfield Nurse faction absented themselves from church in protest and disbelief. So once the Putnams accuse Rebecca Nurse of witchcraft, they decide they're not going to go to church anymore. They don't want to be part of this. And then it tells us it was Edward and Jonathan Putnam who signed the first complaint against Rebecca. And Thomas Putnam's little daughter was the one who fell into a fit at the hearing and pointed Rebecca as her attacker. So we know that at some point, Betty accuses Rebecca of being a nurse. Rebecca of being a witch. And this is really important because we know that they had been fighting over land. So you can kind of guess that Rebecca probably isn't a witch, but that's for you to decide. But we're going to write down some facts here that are in this section. the last thing I wrote down was Francis Nurse had a land war with the Putnams. I'm going to also write down that um, this part right here where it says Edward and Jonathan Putnam signed the first complaint against Rebecca. So I'm just going to include the Putnams sign the first complaint against Rebecca. And the reason I want to write that down is because this is an important fact. The fact that they were fighting over land and then the Putnams accused Rebecca of being a witch go together. So I'm going to stop the recording now. I hope that you got some good notes, and I hope that even though we weren't in class, you are able to understand the story. It was really good today, where we find out some things about Abigail and John Proctor's relationship, and then we meet this new character, Rebecca, and we get her background. So when we come back to class, we're going to pick up here where we've left off. All right, guys. So thank you so much for watching the video and for taking good notes. I'll see you guys later. Bye.